Okay, let's see 1 second. Okay, so a good friend of Nachum's was his yurtzeit yesterday, I think. His name is Avner Achai, Avner ben Achiezer Zichrono Lebracha. So we're going to dedicate the class to him. And Nachum, after the class, you'll have an opportunity to say a few things. Yeah? Good. Welcome, everyone, to Fundamentals of Kabbalah and Chassidut. We are continuing our series on the life and teachings of the Baal Shem Tov. Tonight, we're continuing with a series of individual teachings from the Baal Shem Tov. We've been doing this for a couple of weeks now. As I mentioned, they're in no particular order. Some of these that we will deal with tonight, you've heard before. Others you haven't. But since we're doing a whole review of the teachings of the Baal Shem Tov, hopefully we'll shed some new light on all the different ideas. Again, remember, there's no particular order here. So we'll start with a teaching from the Baal Shem Tov about Pirkei Avot. In Pirkei Avot, it says that every day a voice comes out of Sinai and basically invites people to do tshuva and to come back to the fold. So the Baal Shem Tov asked a classic question. How come we don't hear this voice? Where is this voice? If it comes out of Sinai every day, where is it broadcast? How come we don't hear it? And so it was a rhetorical question. And then he said, and if we don't hear it, so what purpose is it for a voice to come out every day? Baal Shem answers his own question and says, anytime a person has an awakening to do tshuva, to come closer to Hashem, to do a personal accounting, to connect to some inspiring idea that will strengthen their connection to Torah and mitzvot, it's because they're hearing this voice. In other words, it's not a voice that you're going to hear on the radio or the television or on YouTube or in WhatsApp. It's a voice that is broadcasting, it's in the world, and we're not hearing the actual sounds. It's like we've discussed many times, it's the sounds of silence, called Mamad Daka. And it's this voice that is arousing us to come close to Hashem. This is a teaching from the Baal Shem Tov. So in other words, his problem was if we don't hear this voice, so what purpose is it to come out? But he answers, we really actually do hear this voice. Not every person and not all the time. But when we have an arousal to be better, to improve, to come closer to Hashem, it's because we are actually hearing this voice. Now, since we mentioned Sinai, this is not a teaching of the Baal Shem Tov, but the students of the Baal Shem Tov would almost swear that when they were in the presence of the Baal Shem Tov and he was giving over Torah, they could hear the shofars from Sinai. In other words, their experience was a total spiritual, mystical experience of being in the presence of the Baal Shem Tov and hearing him teach. It brought them back to Sinai. And Rashi says, when we came to Midbar Sinai, we came on the first day of Sivan, and it says, by Yom Hazeh Ba'u Midbar Sinai. On this day, they came to the mountain of the desert of Sinai. So Rashi asks the question, why does it say on this day, but then it says they came in the past? He said it should have said on that day they came. Why does it say on this day they came? Rashi says to teach us that we should look at every day as if we're learning Torah, as if it was as new as receiving it from Sinai. That's what Rashi says, very important Rashi. So the students of the Baal Shem Tov were attesting that when they heard the Baal Shem Tov speaking, it was like so new to them. It was so innovative, so fresh, that it was as if they were standing at Sinai and they could hear the shofars in the background. Now, the next idea, as taught from the Baal Shem Tov, is such a part of Chassidut. We've quoted it a million times. Everyone's quoted it a million times, but not everyone remembers that it comes from the Baal Shem Tov. And again, it's not always that he totally innovated these ideas, but he made them fundamental pillars of Hasidic thought. And the idea is what's called Yerida L'tzorach Aliyah, going down or descending for the sake of rising up. So this is in all of Hasidut, in all of Judaism. This idea is quoted all the time, especially on a very, very personal, relevant level when a person experiences a certain down, a certain not positive feeling, or experiences difficulties, obstacles, challenges. And so we're always encouraged to remember that this is an experience of you're going down, but if you know how to look at it properly, it's for the sake of rising even higher. A common expression is, if you're served lemons, make lemon juice out of them. Put a little honey and a little sugar and make sweet lemon juice. In other words, take bitter and turn it into sweet. Of course, this is always very challenging. When you're experiencing a yerida, it's not always easy to remember that every descent has the possibility of an ascent. Just like in gravity, everything that goes up eventually will come down. No matter how high you throw a ball, eventually it is going to come down. The inverse is also true. No matter how far you fall, you can always get yourself up. And that is a teaching that's quoted all the time. Sheva yipol tzadik v'kam. 7 times a tzaddik will fall and will rise. So this idea of Yerida L'tzorach Aliyah was a very strong teaching of the Baal Shem Tov. It's really a statement of great encouragement. And the Baal Shem Tov's great-grandson, Rabbi Nachman, he took the idea and he just rephrased it in Ein Yeyush Ba'olam. There is no such thing as giving up. There is no such thing of being in a situation that you cannot redeem yourself from. Ein Yeyush Ba'olam. Yeyush means like despondency, without hope, hopelessness. And Rabbi Nachman said, there is no such thing, because no matter what the Yerida is, there will be an Aliyah. Now here, this concept is one of the most important ideas of understanding the entire Torah, because the whole idea of going down into Egypt, as we follow the Torah, starting with Yosef going down to Egypt as a slave, and then Yaakov and family following, and then the enslavement of all the people. But then we come out. God brings us out, brings us to Har Sinai, and eventually to Eretz Yisrael. So the theme of 4.5 books of the Chumash are based on this idea of going down and then coming up. The Chassidut adds that the whole Torah is a parable for each and every person, that our soul descends into this world. And for the soul, it's a yirida. It's a real descent to go from the heavenly realms to a physical, material, flawed, broken, challenging world. But then once we're here, then the whole purpose becomes the rising up, the aliyah, the elevation. And so the whole Torah is a mashal for each and every individual soul. Yerida l'tzorach aliyah. As I said, this is a concept that is spread throughout Jewish thought. And as happens many times, we don't really know, or we don't know how to attribute where it comes from. But this is one of the teachings of the Baal Shem Tov. Now, we've mentioned a couple of times that one way of understanding the teachings of the Baal Shem Tov is to understand how he was able to integrate the teachings of the Arizal and to reformat them, reframe them into a more psychological type of language that each and every person can relate to. So the Arizal, one of his main teachings, was the idea of shvirat kelim, the breaking of the vessels. And so he gave over this teaching that in a previous world, it's called the world of Tohu, the lights were so great that the immature initial vessels of creation could not hold them, and they shattered. And with the shattered vessels, there was light. The whole idea was that the vessels couldn't hold the light, but when they shattered and fell, they fell with sparks of light. And the Arizal termed this world Olam HaTikun, because our task is Tikkun Olam, is to rectify the world, is to both find, elevate, identify, and redeem the hidden sparks of light, and to repair the broken vessels. So the Baal Shem Tov, the Ari gave this over in what we'll call a cosmological fashion. how this world came into being. What the Baal Shem Tov did is he took this concept and he made it personal to every person. That this became every person's individual, not only purpose and task and mission, but their reality. And if this world is made up of the broken pieces of the previous world, and there's hidden sparks of light that need redeeming, well, they're not just in the world, they're within each and every person. And so I know I've explained this before, but some of the terms that we use in a very real, relevant, almost daily kind of idea is we translate the breaking of the vessels where the light was too great for the vessels to hold them as the following kind of expressions. I'm freaking out. I can't handle this. This is too much for me. I need my space. I got to get out of here. Expressions like this is a real response to a real reality called Shvirat HaKelim, the breaking of the vessels. Also, though, this idea of hidden sparks of light means, and this is what the Baal Shem taught, is that everywhere you go, every situation you're in, every person you meet, there are opportunities to see, identify, lift up, and help redeem fallen sparks of light. And therefore, this is an ongoing challenge to us in our daily lives, because sometimes if we just see the broken vessels and the challenges and the obstacles and the difficulties, and we can't identify, well, where is the spark of light that can redeem this situation? So that's what the Baal Shem Tov did. He took this, we'll call it Kabbalistic, cosmological explanation of how this world came into being, but then he created a language that could have every person relate to it on a very personal level. And that's why in Chassidut it teaches there's never a situation where you can't somehow redeem some light from it. As I'm speaking, I just thought of a story. And the story is that there was a Chabad convention of women in some city. And when they finished, all the women who came from out of town went to the airport to catch their flights. But I don't remember the circumstances. I think there was like a rainstorm or there was snow, and all of the flights were delayed, and they had no idea for how long they'd be delayed. I think everyone's been in that situation, and it's not a very comfortable situation. It's a big unknown. And so since they were coming from a Chabad convention, the women sent a message to the Lubavitcher Rebbe saying, we're stuck at the airport. What should we do? Should they just go back and try to find a place to stay in the city where they were? Should they wait it out? And as is customary in Chabad, when the Rebbe was alive, people would ask him just about any question. Anyways, so this message got to the Rebbe, and he sent back a message he sent back a message saying, I don't understand, you're stuck. So the secretary, that was the whole message. So the secretary told the women that the rabbi doesn't understand what it means to be stuck. And so the women thought, because English was not his native language, that he needed a definition of what does it mean to be stuck. So they formulate a definition for being stuck, and they sent it back to the Rebbe. And the secretary sends back, the Rebbe understands what it means to be stuck, but what he was trying to convey is there is no such thing as being stuck. There will always be some opportunity. Use this opportunity to do a mitzvah. And so it turns out that because they were at this convention, I think because it was on a Friday, and there was a real problem, like, are we going to get home for Shabbos or whatever? And so all of the women had from the convention candles that they would hand out to women all over the place, and Jewish women, and urge them to light candles. And so all of the women spread out throughout the whole airport. Everyone is finding the Jewish travelers, and they are able to hand out hundreds and hundreds of candles and talk to women. And eventually the storm passed and everyone got to their destination. So that story just popped into my mind as a real example of there's never a situation where there's not a way to redeem it. This is very similar to Yerida L'Tzorach Aliyah. Every descent will have the possibility of an ascent. And further, this is the idea of finding and lifting up sparks wherever they are. And on a deeper level, this is urging everyone to look at the world, especially other people, in a non-superficial manner. In other words, sometimes people come off coarse, come off impolite, come off not very spiritual, come off very non-observant. And the Baal Shem Tov was urging, look at the soul. Don't look at, some of the outside appearances. Look at the sparks of light in this soul. And then you'll be able to relate on a deep way. So, of course, this is a tremendously important teaching. And this is why, as we've mentioned, the Baal Shem Tov had such love and respect and many times awe for what were called the simple Jews. Because he could see through the outside superficialities of people who seemed not so learned, not so sophisticated. He saw their midot, he saw their sterling characteristics, their faith and their loyalty and their love. And that's what he related to. Okay, the next idea is based on a verse in the Torah where it says about the mitzvot, it says, v'chai behem. You should live by the mitzvot. V'chai behem. And so the usual understanding is that we call the Torah Torah Chaim. every evening in our evening service, we say, Ki hem chayenu v'orach yameinu. They are the life, they are our life and our length of days. So the Torah is called alive, chai, and each mitzvah is called alive. So the usual translation is that we should adopt a Torah lifestyle and live within the strictures of halacha, Torah law, Torah custom and tradition. And that would be translated as live by them. The Baal Shem Tov translated the letter bet, chai behem, as to live in them. And what he encouraged is that he said really the only way to do it is with passion, enthusiasm, and joy. If we approach each and every mitzvah with passion and inspiration and joy, then the mitzvah will give us life force. If not, by doing the mitzvah, we'll be connected to the life of the Torah, but it won't necessarily enliven us. So the Baal Shem Tov says, Chai Bahem, live in them. Your life is in the doing of the mitzvah. That is what will give you life force. You do it with joy, it will give you back double the joy. You do it with enthusiasm, it will inspire you double. Interestingly enough, Rashi, for his simple explanation, is actually a drasha. And it says, V'chai behem. So Rashi says that in the world to come, that no matter how much energy or honor or carefulness we put into the mitzvot, their reward and their true life will be in the world to come. But the Baal Shem Tov, and of course that's true, that is true. Our world to come is based on what we do in this world. And there's a very, it's almost an amusing, a humorous teaching from the Slonim Rebbe in Netivot Shalom. And he says that if a person keeps all the laws of Shabbat meticulously, but has no joy from Shabbat, in other words, he believes in the importance of keeping Shabbat, and he is very stringent on himself to fulfill all of the laws, but he, for whatever reason, he doesn't connect to the joy of Shabbat, the spiritual riches of Shabbat. So the Slonim Rebbe says he will most certainly merit the world to come. He said, but in the world to come, he'll be a park bench. These are the very words of the Slonim Rebbe. He'll be a park bench, meaning just like in this world, the way he did mitzvah was, call it dry and static. A park bench doesn't move. It stays exactly where it is. And so if someone kept Shabbos, but didn't move spiritually, then they will be in the world to come, but they will be a park bench. So this is just based on the Baal Shem Tov's understanding of Chai Behem, that they give you real life force. The sages learn something even further from the same verse, where they say you shall live by the mitzvot and not die by them. And this is where they establish that, except for 3 mitzvot, that if you're presented with a situation that either you have to do something that is not permitted or you're going to die, someone is quite literally starving to death, and the only thing there is to eat is non-kosher food, you eat the non-kosher food. You're not expected to die for them. You're supposed to chai behem, to live with them. And this goes to all of the mitzvahs. We're expected to live in the mitzvahs. We're not expected to die. Okay, another teaching from the Baal Shem Tov. And that is, we know that we have this explanation that God created the world yesh mi'ayin, something from nothing. This in itself is a paradoxical statement to really get our head around how do you make something out of nothing. But we know that the word for nothing here, ayin, is not a nothing. It's actually the opposite. It is we'll call it the womb of the birthing of everything. The nothing is because it's egoless. And within pre-creation, it's in a sense the darkness that comes before the light. But in that darkness, just like the womb, the fetus in the womb, it's dark. But that darkness, we're told there's a type of darkness that shines even more than light. So when we say something from nothing, it doesn't literally mean nothing. It means from a type of nothing that is really everything. So the Baal Shem Tov, so he taught that this idea, just like we learned from before from the Arizal, this idea is like, how did God create the world? Something from nothing. The nothing here means there was no time, there was no space, there was nothing that we can grasp of any kind of reality that we could describe. But the Baal Shem Tov said that we all create yesh mi yesh. That we do all the time. That's a very human creative process, something from something. But the Baal Shem taught that between every 2 yeshes, there will be by definition an ayin. In other words, that to truly get from yesh to yesh, there has to be, we'll even call it either a moment of epiphany, a moment of clarity, a moment of inspiration, a moment of silence. Many different ways we can explain it. A moment of meditation, a moment of thought. What the Baal Shem was trying to convey is that this yesh mi'ayin is not a one-time happening. And of course, creation itself is not a one-time event. God is recreating, re-enlivening the world all the time, constantly, every split second. And in fact, according to Kabbalah and Hasidut, every split second, the world reverts to ayin and then is reborn into yesh. And in fact, Rav Ginsburg teaches this is what time is. Time is the constant run and return between yesh and ayin. Every let's say, click of the clock is God recreating the world once again, yesh mi'ayin. And that is what time is. Time is the measurement, if we could put it that way, of the creative process as it's unfolding. So this idea is very, very, very important for each and all of our own creative processes, that sometimes we get so engrossed in different things that we don't give ourselves time or space or energy to come up with new ideas, to come up with new ways of seeing things, new perspectives, new angles on how to look at something. And so, again, whether we call it a moment of clarity or meditation or silence or thought or ego negation, that between every two yeshes, there needs to be an ayin. L'chaim, everyone. Okay, going forward here. So here's a almost a parallel idea based on a verse in Devarim, the 5th chapter, the 5th verse. This is in Parshat Ve'et Hanan, and Moshe, remember, this is a new generation now. The book of Devarim is happening right before Moshe leaves this world and Am Yisrael enters into Eretz Yisrael. So he's reviewing with them what's happened these 40 years in the desert. And here he's reviewing the giving of the 10 commandments. And in fact, right after this verse that I'm going to read, the 10 commandments are repeated. It's the only other time that they're repeated in the Torah, other than when they're given in the book of Exodus and Parshat Yitro. So as part of the review, so Moshe says like this: Anochi omed bein Hashem ubenechem be'et hahi la'agid lechem et devar Hashem ki yereitem mipnei ha'esh v'lo alitem bahar lemor. So Moshe says, just a little background. According to tradition, all of Am Yisrael only heard the first 2 commandments directly from God. And we're told that with every word that God said, their souls fled their bodies. And they had to be rejection. So in other words, every word that God said, they fled, their souls fled. And God had to revive them. After the 2 first mitzvot, the people came to Moshe and said, you talk to God. We're too afraid. It's too much for us. You talk to God and you tell us what he says. So here, that's what this verse is relating to. It says, Moshe is speaking here, I stood between you and God at that time to tell you what God had spoken, because you feared because of the tremendous fire, and basically you couldn't handle it, so you asked me to tell you. So the Baal Shem Tov, as he did often, and what Chassidut does often, will take a verse out of its context and apply it to many other situations. So here it says, I stood between God and you. And the word I here is Anochi. Anochi happens to be the first word of the Ten Commandments. Anochi is just like saying Ani, I. So the Baal Shem Tov said, what stands between God and a person? Their ego, their Anochi, their I. That's what stands between us and God. So you can see here, in a certain way, the Baal Shem Tov flipped this, because Moshe is saying, I did stand between you and God because you were afraid, and therefore I became the spokesperson. I became the messenger for God's message to you. But the Baal Shem Tov took it out of that context and said what we can learn from it is what stands between us and God is a big ego. So this is a classic type of Baal Shem Tov teaching that, especially in Keter Shem Tov, the book that we've spoken about that was compiled by his students and students of students, the different teachings of the Baal Shem Tov. And that's why we have so many of these teachings, because they were recorded not by the Baal Shem Tov himself, by his students and his students' students. So that is a very classic example of, and it's not just the Baal Shem Tov or Chassidut. The sages in the Talmud do this all the time, where they take words from a verse or a verse that has to do with a certain context, and they will take it out of the context and apply it to other situations, because our understanding of the Torah, that it's eternal, it's archetypal, and it applies to each and every person in each and every generation. And so therefore, we have the ability to, we'll call it, stretch the meaning of the Torah to fit all kinds of situations. That's why we say Shivim Panim LaTorah. There's 70 faces to the Torah. Is the ability to do this. Now I'm going to mention two ideas that I'm sure everyone has heard in different classes over the years. I have spoken about it, and I'm sure most people have been exposed to this. But the Baal Shem Tov, two of his most important teachings was that what's called the Nefesh Elokit, the divine soul, is an actual part of God above. Though that word, speaking of taking out of context, that phrase, Chelak Eloka Mima'al, is actually taken from the book of Job. I'm sorry, I don't have the source in front of me. It's taken from the book of Job, and it's in a different kind of context. But the Baal Shem Tov applied this to the divine soul. It's an actual part of God above. And that's how we explain the fifth and highest level of soul, called the Yechidah. The Yechidah is that part of the soul, the godly spark. In that sense, we envision each and every person having a godly spark within them. This teaching from the Baal Shem Tov is almost like the mirror image. It's not only that we have a spark of God within us, and that we see in the name Adam, where the Aleph of Adam represents the divine soul within a person. And the dam, the blood, represents the body. So a human being is a combination of physical and spiritual, of body and soul. So the yechida, this highest level of soul, is the idea that within each person there's a godly spark. The Baal Shem Tov, just in a certain way, just turned the coin, and that each soul is an actual part of God above. It's like two sides of the same coin. Very, very deep idea. But there's another verse in the Torah that in a certain way is much more direct to this idea of the divine soul being an actual part of God above. And that is in the Song of Ha'azinu, where it says, Chalak Hashem Amo, Yaakov, let me get it. I want to get it exactly. I should know this. One second. Ki chelek Hashem Amo, Yaakov Chevel Nachalato. Literally means that God's portion is his people. Yaakov is the rope of his inheritance. So simply meaning that the Jewish people are intrinsically connected to God, that we are God's representatives in this world, because a portion of God is his people, meaning the portion of God in this world is represented by his people. But if you read it just as literally, it means because a part of God is his people. Chalak Eloka Mima'al, that a portion of God is in his people. So this is even a more direct way than the quote from Eov. And so this idea spread to all of Hasidut. There's different ways of explaining it. That's a different story. Different ways of explaining what exactly that means and how it's manifest. But the idea of every person having a portion of a godly soul. So the whole question is this exclusively the Jewish people, or does this include everyone? But we know that everyone is created b'tselem Elokim. Everyone's created in the image of God. And so we get to a certain, we'll call it subtle semantics as to the actual application of what it means, chelak Elokah mima'al mamash, an actual part of God above. The second teaching of the Baal Shem Tov is less known, but we've talked about it many, many times, that each person has a spark of Mashiach. And this comes from the Baal Shem Tov. This is actually a big chiddush of the Baal Shem Tov, that each and every person has a spark of Mashiach. When asked, well, what does that mean? In a very practical way, it means that everyone has a spark of leadership. And with that spark, they can help bring rectification to the world. So I think we even mentioned it just last class, is we know that the Lubavitcher Rebbe on the 28th of Nisan, I believe it was 1991, shocked everyone and said, I've done everything I can do to bring Mashiach. Now it's in everyone's hands. Everyone has to do what they can to bring Mashiach. And so the idea of bringing Mashiach becomes this collective endeavor. And one of my favorite teachings from Rav Ginsburg, and we'll mention that everyone should continue to pray for Rav Ginsburg. We hear he's doing well, but he's still in the hospital, and he still needs our prayers. So it's Harav Yitzchak Feivish ben Braina Malka. Everyone, please continue to pray for Rav Ginsburg. So Rav Ginsburg teaches that the spark of Mashiach within each person, when enough individuals realize and activate and bring in from potential into actualization their personal spark of Mashiach, when enough people do this, it will create a critical mass of spiritual redemptive energy, which will draw the Mashiach into the world. Meaning, if you remember, when the Baal Shem Tov had an Aliyat Neshama on Rosh Hashanah, 1741, and was in the presence of the soul of Mashiach and asked, when are you coming? When is the master coming? And he put it back on the Baal Shem Tov. He said, "Vayafutzu ma'anetecha chutza," when the well springs of your waters reach the whole world. He put it back on the Baal Shem Tov. And so therefore, that's the Baal Shem Tov didn't take it like me alone. That's how he formulated this idea that we all have a spark of Mashiach. We all have the possibility and the opportunity to bring rectification in our little world. Everyone has their realm of influence. But when enough people do it, that will mida keneged mida, a measure for measure, that will draw the soul of Mashiach into the world. It's a very, very important teaching from the Baal Shem Tov. So in order to give us enough time for discussion, we'll end there, and with a big, big blessing that we all are able to really identify within ourselves that huge potential that we have, and to use it to the best of our ability. We would all like to save the world, but we're not always in a position to save the whole world. But we certainly can make a difference in our environment, in our surrounding reality. And that's all a person can do. That's all we can be expected to do. So we should all have a blessing to try to identify, how can I help bring light and love and healing and rectification in the world? And Bezrat Hashem, when enough of us do it, we will merit to see Mashiach